Good morning, welcome back. This is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in the studio on my far right is Shipeta Mathias Hezron from Haki Africa. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely having you here and always a pleasure. Thank you. Shiko Kihika is the founder of Tribalist Youth. Good morning, Shiko.
Good morning, Ayub.
Thank you for your presence here on the broadcast. Buka Omwale will be joining us shortly, the National Vice Chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya. Anthony Buluma is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning.
Lovely having you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Josephine Wanjero is Youth and Gender Activist. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely having you as well. And Wanjohi Njoroge is Youth and Nature Consultant. Your time is all appreciated as well, Wanjohi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
A lot is happening, a lot has happened, and we first start off with this major concern that many learners have, so our parents and stakeholders in the education sector. Many of you are not that afar from your graduation times from different universities, and this largely speaks to, ladies and gentlemen, to the new funding model that many learners feel disenfranchises them, more or less the concern raised, including now the CJ, who says that the inequality in terms of funding should be addressed. The government bills it as right, but these are the underlying grievances that have been expressed. Beginning with you first, Josephine, what's the view from a young person's perspective, having, of course, graduated from a university, and given the circumstances that many learners find themselves in, despite the directive by the government that all should go to the university first, as the mess is being solved?
First of all, thank you for having me, Ayub, and thank you to Citizen TV for always having these conversations. First of all, I'd like to address that one of the major concerns that the youth have had and have been loud about is changing systems, is we are uprooting everything from the roots and we are redirecting it into something that actually works. And one of these systems that needs to be changed is HELB. HELB is not free of scandals, right? And so the government decided to have this new university funding model, which has been under scrutiny for quite a while. And in my opinion, as a person who has schooled with people who have been funded by the government and funded by different scholarships and what have you, this is not a new kind of model. This is a model that has actually been tested, even in Starehe Girls Center and Starehe Boys Center, right? Where if you have the ability to pay for your school fees or even to pay just a bit higher, you pay for it, and those who do not have can pay 50%, 75%, 80%. The question on discrimination is not a question that should be taking so much of our headlines at this point, because this is a very equitable program. Because if you put something like HELB and disbursed according to capitation, remember, you can be called to a university that has maybe more capitation or less capitation just because you apply to it. So you get a funding, maybe you just get 30,000 in a university and you need 50,000 to school all through the year. That includes accommodation, it includes your school fees, it includes your pocket money. So where will you get this extra 20,000? Now, this university funding model is coming to you as an individual, and you where you're coming from. The question should not be discrimination, because there is no discrimination here. What should be the question is, what is this means testing instrument? How is it going to make sure that it's not, now that is not discriminatory? How will we make sure that we are not corrupt with using this MTI? That is the elephant in the room.
And that's where the concern is, because many of the learners who we had interviewed visited what their parents do. And clearly the banding scheme has a mechanism within which you know what you will pay in terms of adding on to the sponsorship that the government will give you. But there are parents who can't make even 200 Kenya shillings a day, yet they'll have to part with 60,000 Kenya shillings. How then, if you are the child of that parent, would you feel towards this model?
The enemy here isn't even that system. Clearly, with what you've just said, the enemy is poverty. And even with HELB, even with 844 or even CBC, the enemy has always been poverty. There are parents who've never been able to afford a textbook. There are schools that have never been able to afford labs, So if we identify these families and we put them in band one, that is, the most the poorest of the, I don't say that, but then, you know, the people who need the biggest help, right? And then we say that, okay, we've footed 75% as a grant, 15% is, or 25% is, 15% is like a loan, which you'll pay, you know, we give you flexible payment plans as you go. Yeah. And then maybe 10% of, let's say 5%, maybe thereabout, you will have to foot for yourself. Now, this is where the county governments come in, because we integrate the systems, and there's acts that you can integrate the national government and the county government and say, now these are our students, we can provide the bursary for the extra 5%. It's doable.
Okay.
But implementing the system is, is the key part. We need to start
the challenge is then the affordability aspect here, and that's the question that I've raised. Shiko, coming to you, is this funding model satisfactory from a young person's perspective? Because it represents just a portion of the wholesale of challenges that young people face here in the country. Which were some of the reasons that had driven them to the streets demanding for accountability from the government, fairness, opportunity, and education for all?
I'm actually shocked that Joss Witten is sitting here and assuming all of us are privileged like she is. Coming from a background where I know majority of the families don't even make a meal a day, I know for sure, the funding model is literally enlarging inequality. As it is right now, we have so many young people who will not be able to join universities. Why? Because their parents can't afford it. And not even universities. I'm talking of a parent who came to my office last week telling me 2 of her kids have to stay home so that one of them finishes Form 4 and then the other one will join in, because they cannot raise the money they're supposed to raise to cover. All right? The whole funding model, I don't know, I just keep conflicting myself, because this government, when it came in, it was a Mamamboga Boda Boda government. But the models they take in are for privileged who can afford. So if you cannot, then this is not for you. So we are saying we're taking our country back to where if one of the persons in your kijiji is to go for university, then let's fundraise for one to go so that they can come back and help another one go, which does not make sense to me. Another thing is, the systems we have in our campuses right now are not working. If we are to be honest, most of the public universities are on their deathbeds. Are we looking at a way that this specific model they're talking about is now able to now start bringing back the glory that used to be there in our systems? Again, it's failing. We are also not forgetting that we live in a very corrupt country, that even that money that is being told, oh, we're going to give the less privileged, will go to the privileged, will go to those who have enough money to bribe to get into the system. So for me, I honestly, and I'll stand again and say, young people are being, again and again, I don't think this government love us in any way, or even like us. Just to be clear, it has proven that it does not want the young people educated, and this is why they are putting in measures that again and again will deter us from accessing education, will deter us from accessing the knowledge we need, because they have realized young people can actually challenge them. Education was one of the issues that took us to the streets, okay. Right? We stayed in the streets for those months. They killed some of us for those months. And at the same time, yesterday, we saw them calling student leaders to State House. For what? For brown envelope, not to solve the situation. Because it's not like whatever is being said is off this world, that some few people have to go sit with the president and explain what people are actually saying. Yeah.
Anthony Buluma, given that these largely learning institutions are seen as engines of social mobility, where brains such as you guys here are manufactured. And one of the reasons that had driven you to the streets is the need for good governance and accountability and constitutionalism, which is the reason that you had and which drove you to the streets. And that's the effect of education and the effect it can have on generations. Do you then think, as the CJ holds, Martha Koome, who said yesterday that the current funding model is discriminatory and locks out Kenyans who have qualified for universities?
Thank you, Ayub, for having me here. And it's always a pleasure that Citizen made it possible for young people to amplify their voice every other Friday. And I commend you for that. I think maybe to put context to your question, Ayub, is first of all, let's have an appreciation of where we are coming from. I think we're coming from a situation where at one point it was almost impossible for many Kenyans to access education. from the basic level, at the primary level, up until when Kibaki was elected into presidency. And then, first of all, apart from just making education affordable at the primary level, he went on to make it free and accessible. And I think that is a measure that was applauded across the globe as one of the most progressive steps by a government. I think the only thing that we would have done in the other subsequent government was to even make it more affordable and more accessible, as opposed to more frustrating. And Ayub, I think from where I sit, I've been privileged to have interaction with the students in their leadership, at their leadership level, and even just generally students. And if I was to pick an appreciation of the pulse of their take in terms of the new funding model, I think government is not in touch. It's not in touch because the assumption that you could base a funding model on the levels of income is not really accurate. Because if you look at generally the cost of living in this country is, first of all, impossible, because many Kenyans are not even able to access the very basics of need, including food, shelter, even just affording life, because the cost of living, the inflation in this country has really gone up. So if you base a funding model around that, first is a misplaced way of doing it, because it just reflects the level of disconnection between government and its people. And then secondly, I think the expectations of many Kenyans was that as we introduce measures of reform, especially in terms of financing education, it should be towards cushioning a majority of Kenyans who really want to access education, but they have not been able from, time immemorial. And the best would have been, government should be thinking along the lines of how much are we investing on education and through what channels? Because there are multiple channels from CDF to I don't know what, bursary. Why not harmonize all this? Because I think the thinking of government has been, how do we utilize, how do we finance university education? Kenyans have been giving options after options. And I think the best approach for government, one must be reflective of the reality, because when you're introducing a new funding model, it must be grounded on some sort of analysis of the current state of affairs. The current state of affairs is that many Kenyans are unable to afford education. Many of us, if you've not financed your education, you had to call a village Harambee for you to actually access education. I know of many young people from the rural setup, they have only had a fair shot of life, because of just accessing university. There are many examples of leaders, including the president himself, who take pride in the fact that had it not been for that opportunity at the university, they would not be where they are. So I think, Ayub, even as they introduce this funding model, I think the reflection of government must be to cushion Kenyans as much as possible, as opposed to appear like you're exploiting the parents. Because how do you measure the level of income, Ayub? Because they're saying maybe band one would be looking at maybe those parents earning, 5,000 or something like that. I don't think that is the attitude that you need. If Kibaki's approach would be that, I think many of us would not actually be where we are today.
Okay. Point taken, because there are some who even can't make 2,000 Kenya shillings a month. And given the market forces, as you have talked about, and the developments that over time have informed our economic reality. Wanjohi, does this effectively then also, on the other end, on the flip side, expose the very glaring social inequality in the context of education in our country?
Thank you, Ayub, for having me today. But I think the irony of this whole thing is that those in Band 1 and Band 2 are being sponsored by taxpayers' money. And the people paying taxes are the parents of Band 3 and Band 4, whose children are being treated like children of a lesser God. There was a payslip of a police officer on Twitter yesterday or the day before yesterday, whose take home was 16,000. And I asked myself, if this parent has, say, 3 children, maybe 2 in high school and 1 in university, does it mean that his children or her children don't deserve to go to university? Or are they children of a lesser God? And this administration has been very keen on creating class divisions. And it started from the campaigns. And until now, they are still devoted and very committed to ensuring that we are not only divided in tribal classes, along tribal lines, but also class lines. And I say this with a lot of pain in my heart. What was wrong with the previous funding model? Why are we breaking something that wasn't broken? The issue here is corruption, and that's what he needs to address. He and his administration need to address. Not, again, creating a bigger problem where there was none in the first place. Today, for you to access 500,000, a loan of 500,000 from the bank, you must be earning at least 150,000. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you can convince the bank that you're going to be able to pay it back. So how do we ensure that these children are going to go to university? The priority, this administration's priority seems to be paying debt at the expense of Kenyans. Education, without education, you're not going to progress as a country. And when we interfere with institutions such as our institutions of higher learning, our health institutions, what are we leaving behind as a country? Second, I'm very concerned because our universities have also refused to innovate. Mm-hmm. At a time when there is at a time when data drives decision-making across the globe, what is the role of our universities, for instance, in determining the market trends? We have business universities. We have universities that are teaching business. Are they leading in research, for instance? Are they selling their findings to businesses in the country? Businesses such as Safaricom, for instance. We need to see them doing research in terms of health, in terms of the effects of climate change, for instance. And these are ways of making money. We are saying, somebody has said that universities are on their deathbed. Why are they on their deathbed?
All right.
Why are they not leading in terms of technological advancements? I mean, we have refused to have an honest conversation on what do we need to revolutionize education. This model is going to kill education. It's going to kill our opportunities of young people accessing education. And this is not the solution to the problem. This is not how we are going to revive universities in Kenya. We're actually going to kill them. We already have private students who are sponsoring themselves. Mm-hmm. So we're saying that these are people who are going to sponsor themselves, and then those who cannot afford it will be sponsored. It's already happening. We already have the private students. So why are we reinventing the wheel? I mean, it's already been invented. Okay. Let's continue.
Yeah. Chipeta, what is Haki Africa's view, given that you have also been championing for equality, and education is one among that?
Yeah. Thank you, Ayub, for inviting me. I think the right to education is a basic human right. If you go in Article 43, it's a socio-economic right. Yeah. And this government must be able to actually help parents to be able to afford basic education. And I was interacting with one student who got an A in Mombasa, and he is in Band 3, and he's supposed to pay 22,000. It's almost in every semester he's supposed to pay 22,000. That student has not been able to clear the high school fees that he's supposed to
before his admission to the university.
Yeah, he has a high school fee of 24,000.
So meaning he won't get his certificate?
He hasn't even gotten his certificate as we speak now. Mm-hmm. He's yet to pay 48,000. He's expected to pay 48,000 if he goes to the university level. And you can understand how hard it is, because the mother is just a bar waitress, and he came to my home, to my house, to actually try and see if I can be able to help. And that's how painful it is, because sometimes we don't live in the reality, or the government does not understand. Vitu kwa ground is mambo ni mabaya huko chini. Parents are really struggling to make ends meet, to try and make sure that actually the children go to school. If you had a child who got an A, and you're faced with the reality of whether you'll be able to afford that amount of money to pay, it makes you a beggar. It makes you come to my house. It makes you do harambes. It makes you be a beggar even to the members of parliament. Mm-hmm. Because we have the members of parliament or the elected leaders have these bursaries that they have. The women rep has a bursary. The governor has a bursary. the MP has a bursary, and you have to be friends or people that campaigned for them to be able to access those bursaries. Then why are we having all these bursaries if we can't make education free? So this is a pain that the parents are feeling as we speak now, and that's why. And those are the things that have actually made some of us be arrested in this protest that we've had. It's because the government is not listening to Kenyans. The government is deaf-tone on the issues that Kenyans have at hand. So it's time now, before you make these new regulations or these new changes in education and funding and all that, they should have involved the members of the public to be able to get their views before coming up with a funding model and then later on asking for university leaders to bring their views. Views should have been taken before that funding model would have been brought in. So that's the situation. Vitu kwa ground ni mbaya.
All right. Good morning, Buka.
Morning.
Lovely having you here on the broadcast.
Thank you very much.
And appreciate it. Before we go on a break, your view on the funding model, which has been the subject of debate, and including stakeholders and even the voice to add on to what appears to be a concern amongst many parents by the CJ Hukome, who said this is discriminatory, this need to collapse all the fundings into one to provide free education for all Kenyans.
First of all, it's important to acknowledge that when it comes to education, you can divide education into two main spheres. You can have education for profit, where education is just commodified as any other commodity in the market, and the lecturers who wants to offer that education is the commodity provider. And also you can have education as a national project, because the current university funding model is worse even than the loan system that actually we inherited from some neoliberal organizations. But you cannot in any way try to make education only accessible to the people who can afford it. This is not just unconstitutional, but it's basically going to widen the gap, the inequality gap that already exists, because some of the people, including myself, without university education, we should be in the village. So basically now what William Samoei Ruto and his political people are telling us that now, wait a minute, we are not going to help the poor people in this country to access education. And if they do access, only a few of the poor people will be able to access education through band system. So we feel very angry at the current university funding model, and we think it's not a question even of reforming the education system. We hold a very strong opinion that education should be not just for a few, but education should be a national project that is publicly funded and a quality education for all to meet our national needs. But if somebody only sees us as a way to make money through the university system, then that person disqualifies himself to be a public servant. Indeed, that's our indictment to President William Samoei Ruto's administration. All
right, ladies and gentlemen, after the break here on the broadcast, we'll be focusing on other matters that now the governance aspect of it, some of the major itemized demands by the young Kenyans who went to the streets. And the former Prime Minister hinted at disengagement from local politics. But are they the perfect replacement for his long and decades-long opposition to government in terms of oversight and faulting administrations, successive administrations, and there is whether this is an opportunity for them to fill up the vacuum that Odinga will be leaving in the event that is he clinches the African Union Commission chairpersonship position following the elections that will be happening. And the hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We are back with more after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.